Good afternoon. I'm Marcia. I'm 14, and I am guilty of having been a rebellious teenager. I thought my granny didn't love me very much, and I didn't love her back. But now she's gone, and I know that I was sadly mistaken. And I really feel the need to tell this story to somebody. Everything started a little more than a year ago when my parents decided to get a divorce. It was my mom who one day just packed her stuff and left my dad for another man. Apparently, she never planned to take me with her because I had to stay with my dad. He, however, preferred to be a breadwinner rather than a father, so I had to move in with his mom, Granny Ann. She always had a very harsh temper, and we were like oil and water. For example, whenever I wanted to go see my friends, she would find some housework for me to do instead. And if I refused to do it immediately, she would ground me by taking away my internet connection. And once, she even slapped me on my wrists because, as she'd put it, I had all thumbs while washing the dishes. Those red marks she left after that happened stayed there for 3 days. Of course, I tried to complain to my dad about her, but he didn't care much. But then there was a moment, sort of a turning point in our relationship. Gosh, it's so hard to talk about right now. I knew that Granny Ann had always been pissed off by freaks of any kind, be it a guy with a mohawk or a girl with a facial piercing. So one day, after another of her harsh speeches about how I should behave better, I decided to get my revenge. I cut all my hair off and colored it pink, which I knew would make Granny Ann really furious. You should have seen her when I came home with my brand new look as she was having a couple of her friends over as guests. She couldn't start yelling at me or anything in front of other people, but she gave me a look which was probably supposed to show how angry and disappointed in me she was at that moment. I knew I was going to be severely punished and grounded, but it was a worthy sacrifice for her public embarrassment for having such a freak of a granddaughter, I thought. This didn't seem to be enough for me, and I decided to go even further. Since I was underage, I couldn't have a real tattoo, but I knew this would make Granny Ann lose her mind. So I asked one of my classmates who was really good at drawing to draw a sort of fake tattoo on the back of my neck. It looked pretty much like the permanent one, actually, so that when I came home and Granny noticed it, she just started swearing at the top of her voice. It was our biggest fight ever. It ended by me shutting the door in Granny's face and locking myself in my room. I became hysterical and cried really hard. Back then, I felt like both of my parents never ever wanted to have me and that Granny Ann was also really unhappy to have to live with me. I knew I was quite a handful, but I couldn't understand why the grown-ups around me couldn't just love me as I was. I hadn't even realized that I'd fallen asleep, but when I woke up, not having heard Granny Ann fiddling around in the kitchen as usual, I suddenly felt that something might be wrong. I got really worried, and when I opened my door, I saw her there lying face down on the floor. I immediately called my dad, but he was out of town as usual. I wasn't yet crying while I was dialing the number or waiting for him to pick up the phone, but as soon as I heard his voice, I just burst into tears. It took him a while to finally figure out that something was wrong with his mom, but once he did, he asked me to call 911 and promised to send me some help while he was on his way home. I don't remember how I called 911, but I will never forget how long those 4 minutes of waiting for the ambulance were for me, sitting next to Granny's body. I didn't want to believe it, but I was pretty sure that she was already gone. The turmoil began with all the paramedics, neighbors, and stuff, and suddenly I saw my mom. That must have been the help Dad was talking about. Even though I had been blaming her for all of my troubles ever since she left us and I didn't want to see her after their divorce, I was glad that she'd come. She hugged me, and I felt like I was finally safe. I couldn't stop saying that it was me who was guilty for how Granny had died. I told my mom everything. About the way I would argue with Granny Ann. About my fake tattoo and our very last argument. She told me that I shouldn't blame myself for anything. But I couldn't help but thinking about our last evening over and over again. I hated my bad temper, myself, and my stupid fake tattoo. Mom stayed with me until late that night when Dad finally got home. Surprisingly, it wasn't until then that I noticed that she was pregnant. I'd even forgotten for a second about what had happened that day. and all I could do was just stare at her belly. Mom noticed this and just said that this was going to be a topic for a separate conversation between the two of us. Then she gave me a quick kiss, said her condolences to Dad, and left. This was the second time that Dad and I watched her walk away from us, leaving us alone. I knew that my talk with my dad was going to be one of the hardest parts of the day. He listened to me carefully, not saying a word, while I awkwardly tried to explain what had happened and why I had pink hair now. I could only look up at him once I had finished talking. Of course, he looked devastated and even seemed to grow older instantly. Just like Mom, he tried to convince me that nothing was my fault. But for some strange reason, I felt that he wasn't 100% sure of that himself. Anyway, when all the necessary medical procedures were over, we found out that Granny Ann not only had a bad heart condition, but she also had a brain aneurysm. This actually meant that she could have died at literally any moment. After the funeral, Dad had to get back to work, and my life had to be changed once again. He told me that he was thinking about putting me into boarding school because he couldn't take me with him and look after me. But I had the option of living with my mom and her new family. It turned out that my mom and Dad had already had a talk about this, and my mom didn't mind. What can I say now? I'm packing my stuff and waiting for Mom and her stupid husband to come and take me to their place. I still can't believe that she's going to have another baby and that she didn't tell me about it before. But I am grateful to her for being there for me when my granny died. Have you guys ever rebelled or done things in your life that you regret? Please tell me that I'm not alone in this. Tell your stories in the comments below this video and share it with whoever you want.